never expected to find myself standing in a Walmart parking lot in January, counting unis and toonies in my mittened hands, trying to figure out if I had enough for a bag of rice and a box of pasta. I was 26 years old. I had a university degree hanging on the wall of an apartment I could barely afford. And my aunt had just cleaned out the emergency fund my dad had left for me and my little brother before he flew to Fort McMurray for a 3-month contract job. 3 months. That was all it was supposed to be. Let me back up. My dad had worked in the trades his whole life, pipe fitting mostly, the kind of work that takes men away from their families for stretches at a time. My mom had passed when I was 19, so it had always been just the three of us, me, my dad, and my brother, who was 12 at the time all of this happened. When a contract came through that would pay him more in 12 weeks than he'd made in the previous 8 months, he took it. Of course he did. He had a mortgage. He had 2 kids technically. Even if I was grown, he had a life to hold together. Before he left, he sat me down at the kitchen table with a coffee between his hands and a look on his face I hadn't seen since the hospital. "I've set aside $2,000 in the joint account," he said. "That's for the utilities, the groceries, anything your brother needs. Your aunt is going to check in. I've asked her to." I nodded. My aunt had always been the reliable one in the family. Or at least, that was what everyone had always said. She lived 20 minutes away. She'd been there after Mom died, dropping off casseroles and sitting with my dad at the table while he stared at nothing. I had no reason not to trust her. My dad left on a Thursday morning in early November. My brother and I stood on the front step in the cold and watched his truck disappear down the street. That was the last normal day for a while. The first 2 weeks were fine. I was waitressing at a bar and grill on Melville Road, the kind of place that's always busy on Friday nights and dead on Tuesdays, and between my shifts and the account my dad had set up, we were managing. My brother was in school. Life was moving. Then I checked the account. I was at an ATM in a Shoppers Drug Mart, just grabbing some cash for a transit card when I saw the balance. I stood there with my debit card in my hand and read the number 3 times. $87. I pressed the button for the mini statement. The withdrawals were all my aunt's, 4 of them spread across 11 days, each one between $300 and $500. The last one had gone through 2 days ago. I drove to her house. I sat in the car for 10 minutes first, just breathing. When she opened the door, she already had the look of someone who'd been rehearsing. She told me she'd had some unexpected bills, her car registration, a dental thing not covered by insurance. She said she'd pay it back before Christmas. Definitely before Christmas, she just needed a bit of time. I asked her about the mortgage payment. Our mortgage payment came out of that account automatically on the 1st. She looked at the floor. I drove home and I sat at the kitchen table exactly the way my dad had, with my hands around a mug of tea that went cold before I touched it. I did not call my dad. I want to be honest about that, and I want to explain it too, because people always ask me later why I didn't just call him. The answer is complicated. The contract he was on had a penalty clause. If he left before the 12 weeks were up, he'd forfeit a significant portion of his pay. We needed that money, all of it. And I was 26 years old, and I had a degree in social work that I hadn't yet used for anything except knowing, in theory, how people fall through the cracks. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was supposed to handle it. The mortgage was 11 days away. I had $87 and a job that after my next shift would put maybe $200 in my account by the end of the week. That wasn't going to be enough. I picked up extra shifts. My manager was decent about it. She gave me the Thursday-Friday double and the Sunday brunch, which nobody wanted because the tips were bad and the customers were entitled. I took all of it. I smiled at everyone. I refilled coffees I hadn't been asked to refill. I made $340 that week, including tips, which sounds like something until you do the math against a mortgage payment and hydro and groceries for 2 people in Ottawa in November. It still wasn't going to be enough. This is the part I'm almost embarrassed to tell, but it's also the part that changed everything. I was bussing tables on a Friday night, and the kitchen had prepped too much of the roasted vegetable flatbread. It was a feature that week, and it hadn't sold the way they'd hoped. At the end of the night, my manager was about to bag it for the compost. I asked her if I could take it home instead. She looked at me for a second, like she was trying to read something. Then she said yes. I brought home 4 flatbreads. My brother and I ate one. The other 3 sat on the counter, and I looked at them while I was making my coffee the next morning, and something just clicked. I started asking around. I'm not going to pretend it was some grand plan. It wasn't. I asked my manager if there was a regular arrangement I could make, taking home food that would otherwise be tossed at the end of each night. She said she'd have to check with the owner. The owner said yes, as long as I signed something saying I understood the liability. I signed it before he finished the sentence. Then I started calling other places. I had a notebook that I carried in my coat pocket, and I wrote down every restaurant, bakery, and cafe within a reasonable radius that I thought might have end-of-day surplus. There were more than I expected. Most of them said no. Some of them didn't call back, but a handful said yes, and that handful was enough to start. I want to answer the question I know people have, because I had it too. How did giving food away solve my financial problem? Here's the honest answer. It didn't. Not directly. Not at first. What it did was buy me something else. Community. There was a woman, I'll call her by her first name, Joanne, who lived 4 streets over in a semi-detached that she'd been renting alone since her husband left. She had 2 kids under 7 and was working part-time at a call center. When I knocked on her door the first time with a bag of surplus bread and some leftover soup from the bar, she stared at me like I was a hallucination. We stood on her step for 20 minutes talking. She told me about a Facebook group for the neighborhood, a mutual aid thing that had started during the pandemic and never really died. She added me that night. That group changed everything. Within 2 weeks, I had connected with a retired woman named Barbara who had a chest freezer in her garage and nothing to put in it, and who was thrilled to have it used for good. I had a contact at a Tim Hortons franchise who was willing to donate day-olds every morning if someone would pick them up before 7. I had 4 families who were quietly, desperately grateful for the drops, and who started, in their own ways, to give back. One fixed my car's back passenger window that had been refusing to fully close since October. Another brought me a bag of her kids' outgrown winter gear for my brother. Another sat with him after school twice a week while I worked the double shifts. It was not a food bank. It was not an organization. It had no name. It was just people in a cold city in November deciding not to let each other sink. The mortgage got paid. I'm still not entirely sure how. It was a combination of my shifts, a small loan from a coworker who insisted it wasn't a loan, and a contribution from someone in the Facebook group who'd heard what I was doing and quietly e-transferred me $300 with a note that just said, "Keep going." I cried in my car in the parking lot of a Loblaws when I saw that notification. My brother didn't know most of this was happening. He knew we were careful with money. He wasn't oblivious. He was 12, not 5. But I kept the worst of it from him. He still went to school. He still had his hockey practice on Tuesday nights, even though it cost me $40 I didn't have, because he'd been going to that practice since he was 8, and I was not going to be the person who took that from him. December came, the hydro bill came, I handled it. I don't fully remember how. The month is a blur of early mornings and late nights and the smell of my coat, which permanently absorbed the scent of the restaurant kitchen. My dad was supposed to be home on the 23rd. He arrived on the 21st, 2 days early. His foreman had given the crew a half day on the 20th, and he'd driven straight through 12 hours, mostly highway, stopping only for gas and a terrible coffee somewhere outside of Sudbury. He texted me from the driveway. I was not home. I was doing a pickup from the Tim Hortons on Cardling, because Barbara had asked me to cover for her that morning. My brother was home though. He'd answered the door in his hockey jersey and apparently just said, "Oh hey dad," like my father hadn't been gone for 7 weeks. By the time I got back, my dad was sitting at the kitchen table with his jacket still on, reading something on his phone with an expression I couldn't immediately place. My brother had apparently very casually mentioned that a lot of people come here now and that I know the guy who runs the Tim Hortons. My dad looked up when I came in. I was carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups and a paper bag of Timbits. I had purple circles under my eyes, and there was a stain on my sleeve from a soup container that had leaked in the car. I was wearing the same sweater I'd been wearing 3 days running because I hadn't had time to do laundry. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me. Then he said quietly, "How long has this been going on?" I sat down. I told him all of it: the account, my aunt, the mortgage, the Facebook group, Barbara and the freezer, the families, the Tim Hortons pickup, the co-worker who'd helped me, the stranger who'd e-transferred me money. I told him about the Tuesday nights I'd sat in the parking lot of the community center while my brother was at hockey, just because it was the only 20 minutes in the week when I had nothing I was supposed to be doing and I could sit in the dark and not be responsible for anything. When I finished, my dad put his face in his hands. He sat like that for what felt like a long time. Then he lifted his head and said, "Why didn't you call me?" I gave him the answer I'd been giving myself for 7 weeks. The penalty clause, the money, the plan. He shook his head slowly. "You are so much like your mother," he said. "She thought she had to carry everything too," he cried. My dad, who I had seen cry exactly twice in my life, at my mother's funeral and the day I graduated from university, cried at the kitchen table in his jacket, with his coffee going cold beside him. I reached across and put my hand on his arm, and neither of us said anything for a while. The situation with my aunt was handled eventually. My dad dealt with it. I don't know exactly what was said. I wasn't in the room. But the money was repaid over the following months, and the relationship changed, not broken, just different. The kind of different that doesn't go back. What I didn't expect was what happened with the neighborhood thing. I'd assumed it would stop when my crisis stopped. That once I wasn't desperately trying to hold things together. The early morning pickups and the drop-offs and the Facebook group would just quietly wind down. But Joanne had already told 3 people, and those 3 people had told others, and Barbara had started a spreadsheet of families who could benefit and local businesses willing to donate. The retired man across from her had a cargo bike he'd been looking for an excuse to use. It kept going without me even trying to keep it going. By spring, the group had a name, nothing dramatic, just the name of the street it started on, which I won't include because the people involved deserve their privacy. It had a small registered presence under the umbrella of an existing community organization. It had 11 regular volunteers and a connection to the Ottawa Food Bank that made the whole operation more efficient. I had become, without planning it, someone people called when they needed to know how to start something like this somewhere else. The social work degree, I will admit, finally started making sense to me. I think about those 7 weeks a lot still. I think about the moment in the shopper's parking lot, reading that balance. I think about the flatbreads on the counter. I think about Joanne's face when she opened her door and the way she looked. Not grateful, not at first, just startled, like she'd forgotten that someone might just knock and offer something with no strings attached. I'm not telling this story because it had a tidy ending. It didn't, not entirely. The mortgage got paid, yes. My dad came home. My aunt is still in our lives in a reduced way. My brother is 14 now and still plays hockey on Tuesday nights. But I also still think about the weeks I didn't sleep properly, and the way I drove past a house I knew was warm and lit and full of food, and thought about how close the line actually is, how small the distance between managing and not managing, between the person dropping off the bread and the person receiving it. That distance is smaller than most people think. I know, because I've stood on both sides of it, sometimes in the same week. I used to think asking for help was the hard part. I was wrong. The hard part is believing when someone knocks on your door with a paper bag and exhausted eyes that you are allowed to just say thank you and let them in. I still think about the ATM screen in that Shoppers on a Tuesday afternoon. The number, $87. The way my hand just stayed there holding the card while the machine beeped at me to take it back. That moment cracked something open. and I've spent a lot of time since then trying to understand what it cracked open into. I think what I learned, not from a book, not from the degree on my wall, but from those 7 weeks, is that the way you respond to something that isn't your fault says more about who you are than almost anything else. My aunt made a choice. That choice had consequences that landed on me and my brother. I could not change what she did. The only thing I ever actually had control over was what I did next, and what I did next was a noble. I want to be honest about that. I picked up extra shifts because I was scared. I asked my manager about the flatbreads because I was desperate. I knocked on Joanne's door because I had more food than I needed that night, and I didn't know what else to do with it. None of it felt like courage from the inside. It felt like improvising in the dark, but I think that's what real problem solving actually looks like. Not a plan, not a strategy. Just you look at what's in front of you, and you ask yourself what's actually useful. And you do that thing, and then you look again. My dad used to say something similar about pipe fitting. You can't force the connection, you just have to find the angle that works. I understood that differently after November. The thing I'm most grateful for, and I mean genuinely grateful, not the performative kind, is that I didn't handle it alone. I asked for help even when I didn't use that word for it. I let my coworker give me money. I called a loan. I let the stranger in the Facebook group e-transfer $300 into my account. I let Barbara run the spreadsheet because she was better at it than I was. Knowing when you are out of your depth and being willing to say so, even quietly, even indirectly, that's not weakness. That took me a long time to understand, and I only understood it because I had no other choice. And Joanne, I think about her face a lot. The way she looked when she opened the door, not grateful, just startled, like she'd been so deep in her own survival that she'd forgotten someone might just show up. I know that feeling now from both sides. I know what it's like to be the person who forgot. I know what it's like to be the person who knocked. The line between those two positions is so much thinner than you like to think. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but I think sitting with it matters. It changes how you drive past a house in January. It changes how you read a balance on a screen. It changes what you decide to do when you have something. Even something small, even 4 leftover flatbreads, and someone nearby has nothing. My dad came home to a kitchen that smelled like recycled takeout containers and a daughter who hadn't slept properly in 6 weeks. He cried. I didn't. Not then. I think I was too tired. But I've cried since, thinking about it. About how close it came. About how many people don't have a Barbara with a chest freezer, or a neighbor who fixes windows, or a Facebook group that actually works. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not that I survived it, but that surviving it showed me exactly where the gaps are, and exactly what it costs when no one fills them. I'm still filling them. In smaller ways now, more organized, less panicked. But still,